Good afternoon, everybody. It is noon, so that is officially afternoon, and this is Beth Herman with the Department of Public Instruction. Welcome to the first SEL example of practice webinar for the school year. We're very excited to have Catherine Reed join us. Catherine has been a partner in this work with the department for a number of years. For those of you that are familiar with the alignment tools and how the SEL Wisconsin competencies align with the counselor's competencies, Catherine is to thank for that work. She and another colleague did the alignment. I've asked her to join us today because Franklin has engaged in a very thoughtful year-long, multi-year process to plan how to roll out social emotional learning. And in some cases, they're doing it differently than other schools, which often start with a curriculum. It's just a nice way to show folks that there are multiple ways to approach this work. None of them is the correct way. They are only correct in terms of whether they fit for the district. So I'm going to turn this over to Catherine. This is being recorded. People ask that. Every one of these will be recorded. Everyone is posted as soon as it's been formatted and closed captioned. I will take questions in the chat box as we're going. Catherine has agreed to take them as we move through the slides and her presentation. Know that I may pause for a moment to wait until there's a logical time to interject and ask the question. We'll also save some time at the end for questions. Please, if you have them, don't be afraid to ask. This is your opportunity to learn from one another about the different ways that this can be done. So without anything further to add, I'm going to turn this over to you, Catherine, and I will mute myself until I am needed. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Beth. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to say hello and introduce myself, and then we'll begin and I'll tell you about our story. So again, my name is Catherine Reed. I'm a school counselor by trade. My current role in Franklin as a school counseling system specialist, and that's really allowed me to work systemically around the social and emotional learning approach that the district wants to take in Franklin, along with some other things. I'm really happy to be here. Unfortunately, I have been under the weather, so I sound a little funny. I have cough drops and Kleenex right next to me here. I may have to break away for a cough here and there, so I apologize for that, but I'm really glad to be here. Beth has been a tremendous partner, along with Greg Curtis and other people at the DPI have been very helpful in our process in identifying what it is that we are looking to do to develop our social emotional learning program in Franklin. So we're going to begin today with what you see on the screen. This is an image of a mountain reflecting in a pool. And I'd like you to just think for a minute and then use the chat box to share back your thoughts. As you're looking at this image, I want you to complete the sentence. Social and emotional learning implementation is like this image because, and just share a couple of words in the chat box. And Beth, if you don't mind, in a minute coming back in and sharing out some of those responses. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see those, and I would like to hear what some people are saying. What do you think? Social emotional learning implementation, how does it reflect this image?
Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat box. What we present is often reflected back to us. Thanks, Rose. Anyone else?
Any other thoughts?
Yep, we got another one. Because we need to take the time to reflect on the whole child and just what we see, at first glance. It can be a tough climb, yet rewarding.
Awesome.
It's like the image because the climb is worth it. Ooh, I agree with that. It's a journey to climb the mountain, so celebrate each step along the way. The question is, if you had to complete the sentence stem, SEL implementation is like this image because, how would you complete that stem? Any other thoughts?
Okay, we can stop there. And if you continue to have ideas and you want to chat those, feel free to do so. It'll be interesting to see those. This is an example of a participatory way of welcoming everyone into the conversation and using a metaphor, a visual metaphor, to have a discussion about what it is that we're talking about. We're talking about something that's really quite immense. When we're talking about social and emotional learning, we do need to take a step back and see a larger picture and recognize the planning and the aspect of the journey that will be involved. And that's something that I personally have definitely become much more aware of, and that our district has incorporated into our work.
Catherine, there was one more just to share. Yep. So yeah. It represents the journey, which includes both moments of enlightenment and addressing the unknown that lies beneath the surface.
Excellent point. The idea of you come around the corner and you see a new vista, you have the opportunity for enlightenment, and yet there are all of these things that you've discovered along the way. The climb is worth it. It's a tough climb, but it's rewarding. All of these aspects, I think, help us all be on the same page about this process that we're discussing. If you may have noticed too that there is a certain emotional aspect now to this discussion about enlightenment and being rewarded. We're really invested in our work, and the work of social and emotional learning implementation brings a lot of people with a lot of heart to the table. So it is very, very rewarding, and something that does take a lot of careful planning. To give you a little bit of information about who I am, where we are, Franklin Public Schools is a medium-sized district. It's a suburban district just to the south of Milwaukee. We have one high school, one middle school that is currently 6th through 8th, previously 7th and 8th grade, and 5 elementary schools. Within those schools, our high school is about 1,600 students. We have 4 counselors, 1 social worker, 1 psychologist. Our middle school team is similar. We have 3 counselors for 1,100 students, 1 psychologist. And then in our elementary school, we have a psychologist in every building, and those buildings are about 300 to 350, 380. And it gives you a little bit of an understanding of what our staffing is like in those buildings in terms of student services. You see our student demographics there. They might be considered typical for a suburban district that is primarily primarily white. We have a fairly standard distribution of students of color for a suburb in our area. Major employers in the area include manufacturing sector, education, and healthcare. We're a high-performing district. We've been doing well for several years. We certainly have our own considerations and things that we're working toward that social emotional learning can help us with. So the social and emotional learning approach in Franklin has been incorporated into our strategic plan. Several years ago, and specifically last year, the district really worked intentionally to develop a coherence plan so that everything that we're doing ties back to these 3 areas and the district values, which you see encircling this F for Franklin, the values of equity, personal growth, innovation, stewardship, well-being. And then within our coherence plan, these areas of a better place to learn, where we are working toward increasing student engagement, students that are college and career ready at graduation, a better place to work, helping all of the people that work in our district to feel that they are driving those values and engaged in that work in a positive way, increasing the percentage of employees who are reporting, working, and living our core values. And then part of a better community where we have established excellent partnerships and pride in our community, where we continue to work on those areas. Over the course of the last couple of years, we've really engaged in a very intentional process to take a look at social and emotional learning. It really started in 2016-17, and at that point, it was an effort in our student services department where counselors, psychologists, social workers got together, started to look at what kinds of things are happening around our district that are building skills in our students to help them to be able to be college and career ready. And we quickly realized that this is not a student services approach. So we had to really broaden and expand at that point and begin to pull in different stakeholders from across the district, beginning with our district leadership. And so in 2017-18, and then again last year, we really focused on
Catherine,
developing a process that, yes.
Don't mean to interrupt you, but
yes.
have you advanced the slides?
I'm on Better Place to Learn, Better Place to Work.
You're still there. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were on your timeline.
Yep.
My problem.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just giving a brief preview, and then I'll advance. Thanks for asking. So our committee process began in 2017, 18, and 19, and then this year we're beginning some initial implementation steps. One of the things that we did was to begin to look consistently at some data points that help us understand how our students are doing, including information from student surveys, including the Gallup survey, where we found that hope and engagement, while it was strong in our elementary schools, began to falter in middle and high school, and that's pretty typical, but it's concerning. We recognize that we have differential outcomes for students who are traditionally marginalized, and we're connecting that back to social and emotional learning. We have engaged in conversations and surveys with our staff to find out what they think, and they've consistently rated the social and emotional skills of students as being highly important, and that students need assistance with those skills. And we have a consistent lack of evidence-based practice for social and emotional learning. We're doing lots of things to help lots of students, but it's not necessarily consistent across levels where we can see a larger benefit. These are some of the reasons we know we want to engage in a comprehensive social emotional learning program. Alongside that, we have, like many districts, increasing awareness of the mental health needs of our students. We have students with high-risk behaviors, as kind of reported in our youth risk behavior survey, and we recognize that we have that need for that systemic social and emotional learning, where it is not simply in the realm of student services, where we have an approach that incorporates everyone in the district. So this timeline represents a little bit of the approach that we've taken in Franklin, beginning in 2016 to 18, to research social and emotional learning implementation. I consulted with Beth at the DPI and found information from her around implementation science, which reflected really the process that our district has been using for several years around any new initiative, which involves consistent study, identifying best practices, piloting those, and getting feedback. Excuse me. We attended conferences. We began to speak to other districts and other schools that were implementing to try to find out what is working with in your context and how can we use that information. And one other aspect was beginning to collect and analyze our own data in a way that gave us good information consistently so that we could begin to make good decisions based on that data. Last year, we established a formal district committee and a plan for universal instruction and adult social and emotional learning. So that universal instruction is, what is it that we will start with that will impact all students, and how can we build the capacity of the adults that are in front of those students so that they can be ready to do that. Alongside that, we really took special attention of our mental health support for students. We used the DPI mental health framework to give us context for that. We consulted with other districts that had comprehensive mental health supports in place. And we created and searched for an on-site clinic, created an RFP, for on-site clinics, and reviewed several proposals and identified a clinic that we would bring on board. So at the beginning of this year, we onboarded an on-site clinic in our high school and in 2 of our elementary schools. We have 2 therapists in the district now who see clients, students, and families. They operate as an independent organization, but they offer those services in a way that is removes some barriers for some families, and that has been a really successful aspect of our program. So that's definitely, at one end of the spectrum of supports for mental health. Along the way, we've been reviewing and studying our own supports for mental health at each of our levels, identifying what it is that is in place, how we're using data to make decisions, what interventions are appropriate, and how can we make those consistent from level to level so that we have a comprehensive support system for students who are on our radar for issues with mental health. Beginning this year in 2019-20, that universal approach has been a really important part for us, and that has meant professional development for all of our staff around what social and emotional learning is, and we're using the CASEL framework for our introduction, helping everyone to understand what the CASEL competencies are, identifying the competencies as related to their grade level. We'll be working on refining those competencies. We call them I can statements, and we have those presented in student-friendly language at each grade level for all of those competencies. They're aligned with the state SEL competencies as well. Alongside bringing everyone's understanding of social and emotional learning up to speed. I think I'll take a drink. Another major aspect of our professional development has been implementing 3 signature social and emotional learning practices in all classrooms and across all adult meetings. And again, I apologize for my voice. If you're not familiar with the 3 signature practices, I recommend searching that on the CASEL website. And I'll go into that in a couple of minutes. We'll have a chance to talk through that in a moment. Okay, let's see if I can make it through. Next, I'm so sorry. Next steps for us, beginning in the year 2020, is to take what we've learned so far in reviewing and evaluating potential evidence-based instruction programs for explicit instruction around social and emotional skills. So this year we'll be looking at programs identifying what's important at each level for us, what might be a good fit, and then beginning to take a look at what those might look like in our schools next year. All right, I've got a link here to our case study, which is, Beth has that linked on the BPI website, and I think she's including that as well. So you can read a little bit more about the history of our process and how we've come through. To give you a little bit of understanding about what we've been doing for universal instruction and mental health support. Beginning last year, we started to be a little bit more consistent with our universal instruction around restorative practices in our district. And each elementary school received instruction and professional development around building community through community circles. So that this has led to each of those elementary schools setting aside specific time for teachers to use restorative practices to build relationships and community within their classrooms. In addition to that, we spent some time on trauma-sensitive training in each of our buildings to help our teachers understand some of the things that our students may be coming to school with. Those specifically help to provide a foundation for social and emotional learning in our district. Alongside that, I mentioned earlier, our mental health support for students becoming consistent across buildings. We're creating a mental health referral database. We've partnered with an on-site clinic. These are our two clinicians working in our high school and a couple of our elementary schools. We'll soon be moving toward an office at the middle school as well. And finally, we have a mental health coordinator role identified as well. Beginning this year, we're really working toward creating the conditions for social and emotional learning in our universal approach by identifying these social and emotional competencies and the CASEL model with our staff across the district. And earlier I was mentioning the 3 signature practices for social and emotional learning. This has really become a hallmark of our work this year. The opening activity that we engaged in was an example of a welcoming inclusion activity. It's a way for all of the participants in a learning community to engage with each other, share something from their own way of thinking, and contribute to a larger sense of community. So teachers and leaders across the district are using these practices to help build those conditions where we have a stronger sense of connection and community within our groups. So this is happening in all staff meetings, in all collaborative meetings, in almost every classroom across the district and throughout the day, so that students are now having an opportunity to experience that sense of welcome and opportunities to learn where they are given a chance to work together with other students and engaging with them, and then bringing that all together at the end with an optimistic closure, so that brings boundaries and a connection back to what was learned and what might come next at the end. Throughout this year, we will be reviewing evidence-based programs and resources using tools like the one you see here, the hexagon tool, to help us understand how a program or a resource might meet the needs of our students. fit the programming that we currently have, be appropriate for students and staff in terms of readiness, the degree to which that evidence would fit the needs of our students, etc. Our plan is potentially to identify programs that are appropriate, pilot those in some select classrooms, get some feedback from multiple stakeholders, and then make some recommendations for the future year in terms of implementation at different levels. As a result of these efforts over the course of several years, we're moving toward the top of that mountain where we're equipping all of our students with social and emotional skills, with the abilities and the attitudes to be well within school and their home and their community in a holistic way. Again, I apologize for some of the voice issues, but I welcome any questions.
Also, just so everybody knows, I've posted in the chat box links to the 3 signature practices for adults as well as classrooms. Question, is the explicit instruction exploration focused on K-12, Catherine?
Great question. Yes, it is. Yeah, we're looking at 5-year-old kindergarten through 12th grade, and inclusive of our students who are with us beyond 12th grade in a specialized program.
Other questions? Catherine, I just happen to know that you guys have also included some student voice in the process.
Yes, we have.
Would you speak to that a little bit? I hate to ask you to talk.
Sure.
But...
I know. Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of ways that we've included student voice is by introducing, last year, for example, introducing some of the 3 signature practices in pilot classrooms, and then sitting down with our students in some small focus groups and trying to understand what is the impact of this approach from your perspective. We've done the same thing with our students who've been involved in restorative practices in those community building circles, understanding what is the impact for them and how does this change how they perceive themselves in school, how do they feel in terms of their sense of connection. We do plan to continue those efforts this year as we take a look at some different programs and try some things out. We're consistently asking for feedback from students to make sure that we're not blindly moving forward with something that doesn't sit well with students, and we'll do the same thing with our parent groups as well.
Excellent.
I think one other thing that I want to circle back to is this idea of careful planning. When we first started out as a smaller group, it wasn't very long before we were thinking, okay, we need to start looking at special programs. We need to look at curriculum. And it was our first thoughts out of the gate. And from a school counselor perspective or student services perspective, that's kind of how we operate, because that's how it has been before in our work. And it's been a lot of learning on my part, especially about the importance of stepping back from implementation and looking at what your long-term goals are and who needs to be a stakeholder at the seat at the table to help to build something that is comprehensive, that is going to be long-lasting and appropriate in multiple settings for multiple different kinds of people. And I think that's been one of the best things about doing the work, is that it isn't just me as a counselor delivering this work. It is, how will this work within the classroom? What aspects will staff be participating in? How can we get their voice into our decision-making? What will student experience look like? How can we get their voice in the decision-making? Even as far as to incorporate what we know about college and career readiness for students to understand what our employers are saying and what feedback we get from students and college admissions and college professors about how students perform once they leave us. What are the things that are most important? And we see a lot of consistency across the board between the competencies in SEL and those employability skills or those college and career readiness skills. So that in itself tells you that the work is really important and the outcomes for students are really important.
So another question, and maybe some of what you've been describing actually helps to push back a little bit, but the question was how you have been addressing pushback that you might be getting from high school teachers who are focused on content and feel maybe they have no time for SEL instruction. So how is this rolled out at the high school?
So this year in particular, we've really talked mainly about what are these skills that we're talking about, why are they important for students, and how can we as a system support these skills for all students. And the way that we've introduced that is through the 3 signature practices. We're really at the very beginning of that. We certainly have, though, through our committee work, had those questions elevated. And they're really significant questions. This is what teachers live with. And what I will tell you is that when we come down to identifying the skills and how those impact learning and how those impact teamwork and working within the classroom and persisting on problems, I would say it's quite unanimous among teachers that these skills are highly important. So our approach has been very slow, particularly to to address this question, but from an angle of we're looking at what's really valuable for our students. Here are the skills that we know they need. Here's a way that we can begin right now with these 3 practices to build the conditions for that. We're going to continue to look at investigating what the explicit instruction might look like or how we will further embed social emotional learning in our teaching. Please join us as we look at this. And I think we've had pretty good responses from our teachers so far. I'm sure we will have folks who are going to ask those questions. And I think as long as we all agree that each voice is important, we're going to listen to those voices and bring them to the table, I think we'll have successful results, because it won't work if we don't listen, and it won't work if we charge ahead without incorporating multiple perspectives.
You had talked about how you created a team to do this work. Who's on that team, and how did you determine who those players should be?
So we put out a call last year to staff who are interested in, and on that team we have staff from our out-of-school time provider in district, our kids care. We have folks from our rec department. We have teachers from all levels, several administrators, student services staff, staff from our special education work, leaders at the top level, so that we have a really good distribution. It's a school-based team. It currently does not include representation from parents or community or students. We do the heavy lifting as a school-based team and then dip into those other stakeholder groups to get feedback on what we've learned and what we're considering as we go along. And that team met several times throughout the year. Last year, we did a lot of deep studying around social emotional learning, some discussion about what that looks like in students, a review of those draft ICANN statements and the SEL competencies from the state, to come up with some agreements around what it is that we thought was important for the district moving forward and how we might move forward. And as a result, we developed a written plan. And that plan sets forth definitions around social emotional learning so that we, when we are in the district, can refer back to that document as a grounding document. Refers to the significant research that was used in our work so that we can always ground back to those same research studies and founding documents. It grounds back to the Castle model. So what we're doing is we're creating a foundation of understanding. And then through the professional development this year, we're really building capacity and understanding about what social emotional learning is and spreading that throughout the district. We still have many steps to go. We're at the beginning of our work, and it's taken a good amount of time to really kind of set up our process in a way that allows us to get that consistent stakeholder feedback, so that what we do decide as a district to do moving forward is something that has been shared consistently across the district.
So that leads to another question. So this question is around how you're sharing tools with students and classroom teachers, especially in the context that oftentimes explicit instruction, such as a curriculum like Second Step, is done by counselors. But then when we ask teachers to do it, while it sounds good, it's not always realistic for them who feel that they don't have time. How would you address that?
Yeah, it's a question I don't think we have an answer for yet at our level in the district. It is one of the questions that will be front and center of our minds as we look at programs or resources, and what will be best ways for students to receive that explicit instruction. So much of social and emotional learning is simply good teaching. And that's one of the big ahas that I've come away with. If you study the 3 signature practices and some of the other foundational documents included in our plan, organizations like American Institutes for Research and Castle have really done a lot of some deep work around what is good teaching and how does that contribute to the social emotional competencies of students. And they've identified specific teaching practices that promote social emotional learning. So we have to remember that a lot of the learning comes from the types of interactions, the types of engaging practices that teachers are doing in their classrooms. And that's definitely a part of what is promoted in Franklin. So there is pretty significant embedding of social emotional learning within teaching practices. So I think that's an aspect that can't be overlooked. I think there is a place for explicit instruction. I think that's what the research shows as well. But it might look different from a traditional approach that we might have seen 10 years ago. It might incorporate pieces of a traditional approach and be supplemented with student or peer-led approaches that build student advocacy and student voice into the social emotional learning program. We don't know what ours will look like, but I anticipate that it would be a melding of a lot of different things. Some explicit instruction, some excellent teaching practices that have students talking to each other, some conditions for social emotional learning, so through restorative practices and community building. We encourage student voice and engagement and connection, things like that. So I personally, this is my own personal viewpoint, don't think it's a one approach, a one size approach. It's multiple things, and it all depends on your context.
So, I mean, I know that you referenced the fact that you're still early in your process, and you certainly are. But I think to say that SEL won't be happening in your district until a curriculum is in place would be false. So
Correct.
the work that you're doing to build the staff competence first, understanding about SEL and all of that, will lead to the ability to more seamlessly integrate some form of explicit instruction, rather than trying to start with that, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, the sense that if I'm a classroom teacher and I've been handed a program to deliver and it's my day to do lesson number 3, if I don't understand the competencies and I don't know how it fits into the work that I'm doing in my classroom, I think it's a separate thing. But if I've had significant time to understand how these competencies impact student learning every day and how they impact my class every day, then I have a little bit more buy-in into what's in this package program that is meaningful, and I know how to apply that. I think our teachers do that all the time, to be honest. I think they're really looking for resources that can help them tie those things together. Again, I don't know exactly what it will look like in our district. I don't know the degree to which teachers will be in front of students with explicit instruction. I really don't have any answers in that regard. We have yet to do that work. But I think with teachers having opportunities to build community with students through restorative circles, especially at the elementary level, they're engaging in real conversations with students about things that are important to students. Students are engaging in conversations with their peers and their teachers about things that are important, and they feel heard, seen, listened to, and that sense of community is a huge step toward creating a place for any kind of learning of skills, because it creates the opportunity for students to be safe in an environment where I can learn something new that might be a challenge for me, where I can be vulnerable among my peers, and I think that's a really important thing.
So you just got a kudo, thanking you for sharing what you're doing, and that you guys are doing some awesome work. So I want to make sure I let you see that. And also, having had the privilege of sharing some time with you and talking about this, I know that you're also looking at future work around how to incorporate business and community leaders in this work moving forward. Any thoughts or anything you want to share about that?
Yeah, that's an area that I think is really important. We've had some incredible success in our education for employment work around bringing our community into the work of teachers in the classroom, and into the lives of students. So we've been able to provide our students with, and our community with, that connection that really has made a difference for kids. So we have students who are receiving mentoring from community members, and being able to go out into the community and serve as interns, completing youth apprenticeships, really building this alliance between what is done in our schools and what the community is, the reality of the experience in the workplace, and to some degree to higher education. We've been able to have a two-way conversation about what is needed, and what works, and how to develop those kinds of competencies and skills in our students, and how that contributes to students being ready for the future. And that's our goal, is for students to really be able to persevere through obstacles and learn skills that they will be able to use in the future, and learn them now while they're still in school. So to the extent that we can provide students those opportunities, from an SEL lens, from a social and emotional lens, I think our students can only benefit. I don't know exactly what that would look like as well. It's another area for us to really explore. But I can tell you that through our Education for Employment work, we also have had committee work that has incorporated members of our community, and they've had extremely powerful voices encouraging us to elevate the kinds of skills that are aligned with social and emotional learning when we're working with students, and understanding that academics are highly important and absolutely vital for students to be ready academically, but they need more. And through our social and emotional learning approaches, we can build those capacities in our students so that when they leave us, they're prepared for what comes. And I think having partners in the community to help us with that work is going to be really important.
And I just kind of want to point out, this is a strategy. So if you're finding that you're struggling to get school-wide or district-wide commitment to move forward on this, don't forget that the power that the community has to say, you know, your employers, the folks that are working with your kids, the people that are coaching them, all of those folks that have some skin in the game to say, we really need people to have these skills when they come to us. They can help to get some buy-in perhaps for you. It's a strategy just keep in mind. And it also then, as Catherine's talking about, sort of elevates the work to become more than just something the school does. So I just want to point out that that can be a well-used strategy if you're struggling to get the support you need at a higher level. Any other questions that we have? Please feel free to put them in the chat box. So Catherine, while I'm waiting to see if there's any more there, just are there any thoughts that you have about, you know, a lot of times folks want to get started because there's such a need, and you guys deliberately decided to go slow. Was there some difficulty in doing that? Did you guys have to push back on people who wanted to run with it? Was it something that you just all sort of agreed with?
I don't know that there was one thing, but we certainly have had each of those things. So, you know, even now, I hear from teachers who are really looking forward to having more explicit instruction, and feeling that, you know, the students are ready, that they're ready, and recognizing that that might be present in your schools, and that you might have voices who are saying, we really need this now, let's go, let's pick something and let's get started. I think having started with some introduction of community building circles has been helpful, because there's been a little bit of grassroots interest in, well, wait a minute, how can I use this to kind of develop the culture in my classroom, because I'm seeing how that could happen. And so having people have a little bit of a taste of community circles, even though it is not an explicit instructional approach, it provides opportunities for students to experience and learn social and emotional skills in that group setting. I think that's been an aspect that's been helpful, because people have had, well, I'm going to use this tool right now to build community in my classroom. And my hope is that the 3 signature practices is also part of that. So we're each year adding another element or an aspect that can kind of build foundation. If you think about the traditional 3-level pyramid, we added, you know, we can think about adding another layer. I think the mental health framework also has this. Beneath tier 1 is really a foundation, and that's pretty much where we are. We're building a foundation which we think we need before we implement tier 1. We really need a strong foundation before we start adding something explicit. And so that is a healthy reminder that we want this to be something that is sustainable in the long term, that outlives the people who thought it up and brought it to the table. And I think that is the way to go. And I think we've had good agreement about that. And occasionally people, even myself and people on our team, we start thinking and getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, and we kind of help bring each other back to, wait a minute, we have to remember, in order to make things work, we have to have this foundation in place. And I think that's been helpful for us. To be consistent, for one thing, when a variety of ideas and opinions come up. And I think it's appropriate also because we want to avoid any kind of whiplash, introducing something and having that introduced at the same time as another important aspect of teaching and learning. So we have an opportunity to make sure we're not overwhelming people.
So somebody asked if you could share some resources you have to begin using restorative circles among staff and with students. If you can send some links to me, I certainly can send that out with this.
Sure, and I will definitely do that, and I will recommend that people get some key people trained. The Wish Center offers restorative circle training. There are multiple entities that offer restorative practices. There are books and many wonderful videos online that you can use to build your own understanding and then build a practice after having been trained. I think the training is really important, and having some key champions trained and be willing to share their knowledge with others is really an important piece of that. And then to continue it by offering continued support, and that's something that we're trying to do in our district as well, is like continually tapping in and finding out what's working, what's not working, how can we all help each other.
So you mentioned the Wish Center. I've linked their page on restorative practices so that people can check that out. They do provide training, and it's not going to break the bank. Also want you all to know that in that folder that I linked to with a number of different case studies, if you go into Franklin's folder, it also includes a little bit more look at their multi-year plan. It's called Plan at a Glance. So there's some other things in there for you to take a look, so you can kind of dive in a little bit deeper on what they're looking at in terms of those different years and how they've thought about that. So we're closing into the end, and Catherine, I don't want to prolong this with with your cold, and I so appreciate the fact that you were still willing to do this. You guys have a great story to share. If there are any other questions, please type them in. People are thanking you for your time. If you find that you would like the glance documents, the link I said in the beginning of the chat for the Google folder that has case studies, SEL case studies from multiple districts in it. There's a folder in it for Franklin where you will find the case study and the at a glance document. If you are on this call and you believe you have a story to share about your SEL implementation, please let me know. That's what these webinars mostly are going to be about this year, so that people can hear from one another how you're doing this work. There's so many great innovative things happening. Franklin has a great story, but they're one story. So please feel free to let me know if you'd like to share yours. And then I'm also going to put out there, if you feel like you'd like to get more information from Catherine, contact me and I can put you in contact with her to ask some questions more specifically related to your situations. How does that sound, Catherine?
Sounds great. I'm happy to take any questions. If people want to write to me, that's totally fine. I'm happy to share, and I always learn from other people just as much through their stories and their questions. And we still have a lot to learn yet and a lot to do. So I just want to say thank you to Beth Herman for all of the incredible work that you've done. If any of you have not taken time with the social emotional learning section of the DPI website, it is a treasure trove. It truly is. There's so much information there that is so highly valuable, and Beth's work in these webinars this year and last year with the programs and the work that she does in the state level conferences and so on. It's really valuable. So don't forget the Social and Emotional Learning Conference. Building the Heart Conference is coming up. There's just so many ways to connect with other people to learn that then Beth is at least partially responsible for a lot of that. So thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, so we will end the webinar here. This, as I said, will be recorded and it will be posted once it is closed captioned and formatted. If you have any other questions or would like to ask them or send some things my way, please feel free to email me. I'll put most of you probably have my email, but I'll make sure that it is in the chat box.
And I'll add mine in case it's not there.
Yep. And everybody have a great rest of the week, and stay tuned for next month. It's going to be a little bit different for the webinar as we're kind of rolling out some different things around assessment for SEL. So stay tuned. I'll send that stuff out through the SEL mental health and mental health grantee listservs. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.